He walked onto the plane, unaware that today would be the day he was humiliated, degraded, and treated like he was nothing. A man who had given his entire life to service, to honor, to sacrifice. Yet in the eyes of some, he was still less than. Samuel Grant had seen the world. He had sat in war rooms with generals, shaken hands with presidents, and built a legacy that few could match. But today, none of that mattered. Because today, he wasn't seen as a hero. He wasn't seen as a leader. He wasn't even seen as a person. To Lauren Whitmore, the arrogant flight supervisor, he was just another old black man who didn't belong in first class. To her, his presence was a mistake, one she was determined to correct. And as the flight took off, so did her cruelty. What started as condescending smiles and sharp words quickly escalated into something far worse. But what happens when the man being ridiculed isn't who they think he is? When the flight lands, the truth will come out. And for those who thought they held all the power, it will already be too late. Get ready for a story of arrogance, humiliation, and ultimate justice. Do you think people like Lauren deserve to get away with their actions? Or should karma always catch up to them? Comment below, like this video, and subscribe to see how this journey unfolds. And let us know where you're watching from. Lauren Whitmore stood by the entrance of the first-class cabin, her arms folded neatly across her pressed navy blue uniform, watching as the last of the passengers trickled in. Her eyes scanned the well-dressed businessmen, the socialites draped in designer scarves, and the silver-haired moguls who practically exuded old money. It was a world she understood, a world she respected. But then, her gaze landed on a man who did not belong. He was old, black, and dressed in a suit that had clearly seen better days. His leather briefcase, though polished, showed signs of wear, and his shoes, while clean, lacked the gloss of those who traveled in first class. Lauren felt the irritation rise in her chest. Another nobody trying to squeeze into a world that wasn't meant for him. As he approached, she straightened her posture and plastered on a plastic smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Are you sure you're in the right place?" The old man, unfazed by the patronizing tone, reached into his pocket and pulled out a neatly folded boarding pass. He extended it to her, his expression calm and patient. Lauren took it with exaggerated care, unfolding it slowly, her manicured fingers deliberately dragging across the paper as if expecting it to crumble under her touch. Then, with a dramatic raise of her eyebrow, she exhaled. "Oh," she said, voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "First class, huh?" A few passengers glanced up from their devices, their curiosity piqued. Lauren forced a tight-lipped smile and tilted her head. "And you're sure this ticket wasn't, I don't know, gifted to you? Charity organizations do that sometimes." She laughed lightly, as if sharing an inside joke with the other privileged passengers. The murmurs started almost immediately. A woman in pearls shifted uncomfortably. A businessman lowered his newspaper, glancing at the old man with mild amusement. The message was clear. He didn't belong here. The old man, however, remained composed. "Yes," he said, voice steady, "I'm sure." Lauren's fingers tapped against the boarding pass as she pretended to inspect it further. Then, with a sigh, she handed it back, her smile still in place, but her eyes betraying her irritation. "Well," she said, stepping aside reluctantly, "I guess rules are rules. Welcome aboard." As the old man walked past her, she muttered just loud enough for him to hear, "Enjoy it while it lasts." The moment he was out of earshot, she turned to her junior flight attendant, Lily, who had been watching the exchange with an uneasy expression. Lauren rolled her eyes. "Can you believe that? First class is practically a joke these days." Lily hesitated. "He had a valid ticket." Lauren scoffed. "Oh, please. You saw him. Guys like that don't fly first class. Either it's a mistake or he got lucky. And I don't know about you, but I don't believe in luck." Lily didn't respond, but the doubt was evident in her expression. Further down the aisle, the old man reached his seat and carefully placed his briefcase in the overhead compartment. He moved with deliberate precision, unbothered by the stares directed his way. As he settled in, adjusting his seatbelt, he caught the whispering from the row behind him. "Do you think he's a retired janitor who won the lottery?" Maybe a church group pitched in for him. He looks like one of those people they parade around for feel-good stories. The old man exhaled slowly, his fingers resting lightly on his knee. He had been here before, not in first class, but in this moment, in this atmosphere of unspoken judgment. It never changed. Lauren strolled past his row, her professional smile still plastered on, but the condescension in her eyes unmistakable. She didn't see him as a guest, let alone an equal. She saw him as an inconvenience, one she fully intended to deal with. For now, though, she would let him sit, let him enjoy the illusion. The moment the old man took his seat, Lauren's fake smile vanished. She turned toward Lily, her lips curling into a smirk. "Did you see that?" she whispered, just loud enough for other first-class passengers to hear. "We have a business mogul flying with us today." Lily frowned. But Lauren was already walking back toward the old man's row. With exaggerated politeness, she leaned forward, resting one manicured hand on the seat in front of him. "Sir," she cooed, her voice syrupy sweet, "I have to ask, what do you do for a living?" The old man hesitated, shifting slightly in his seat. Lauren cut him off before he could answer. Wait, let me guess." She tapped a finger against her chin, eyes sparkling with cruel amusement. "Insurance salesman?" No, a used car dealer." She gasped, snapping her fingers. "Or are you one of those motivational speakers who tell people to believe in themselves while selling cheap books in the back of a church?" A few passengers chuckled. The old man looked down at his hands, gripping the armrest of his seat. Lauren turned toward Lily, raising an eyebrow. "What do you think, Lily? He's got the look of someone important, doesn't he?" Lily hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but Lauren didn't care. She was putting on a show now. "I mean, it's not every day we get a millionaire in first class, right?" Lauren laughed. "Must be a self-made man." The old man's fingers tightened around the armrest. Lauren wasn't done. "Or maybe," she turned back to him, her expression turning mockingly sympathetic. "Were you one of those people who bought 1 Bitcoin 10 years ago and just got lucky?" More laughter. A few passengers shot him pitying looks, but no one said a word to stop it. The old man swallowed hard, his face hot with shame. Lauren clapped her hands once, as if concluding an important discussion. "Well, either way, congratulations on making it here today. I'm sure it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience." Then she turned on her heel and strutted away, grinning as she heard the quiet murmurs ripple through the cabin. Lily didn't follow. She lingered, glancing at the old man, whose face was still turned downward. He hadn't said a word. Lauren called over her shoulder, "Come on, Lily, don't get too attached. He won't last long up here." The humiliation was suffocating. The old man's fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted his seatbelt, his body stiff. He could feel the eyes on him, the unspoken judgment. One row back, a younger businessman leaned toward his colleague. "Do you think he actually paid for this seat?" The other man shrugged. "Probably got an upgrade from points. Or charity. You know how these airlines do goodwill stuff sometimes." The words burned. He wanted to speak, to say something, to explain himself. But his throat felt tight, the shame pressing against his chest. Lauren passed by his seat again, pretending not to look at him. But just as she did, she accidentally bumped his arm, forcing him to jerk sideways. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, her tone dripping with insincerity. "I didn't see you there." She didn't wait for a response before continuing down the aisle. The old man exhaled shakily, gripping his arm where she'd nudged him. He wanted to forget this moment, to block it out. But he knew Lauren wasn't done with him yet. Lauren paced down the aisle, pretending to check on the passengers, but her eyes kept flicking back to the old man. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, shoulders hunched ever so slightly. She could practically smell the discomfort radiating off him. That wasn't enough. He was still sitting there, still thinking he could just blend in. With a dramatic sigh, she turned back and marched toward his seat. "Sir," she said loudly, ensuring every head in the cabin turned toward them, "I need to check your ticket again." The old man hesitated. His grip on the armrest tightened. Lauren rolled her eyes. "Come on, don't make this difficult." She reached down and snatched the ticket from his hands before he could react. holding it up like it was a counterfeit bill. She inspected it with exaggerated scrutiny. Interesting. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Passengers shifted in their seats, watching with mild amusement. Lauren clicked her tongue. You see, I've been working in first class for years, and I never forget a name. But yours. She tilted her head. It doesn't ring a bell. The old man swallowed hard. Stand up. The words were sharp, cutting through the hum of conversation. The old man's lips parted slightly in shock. Lauren plastered on her sweetest, most condescending smile. If this is all just a misunderstanding, I'll make sure you get right back to your seat. She gave a pointed glance toward the economy section, where you belong. A few passengers chuckled. The old man hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. Lauren's patience snapped. She leaned down and grabbed his briefcase, yanking it out from under his seat. What's in here, huh? Let's see if you're really first-class material. Before he could stop her, she flicked open the latches and dumped everything onto the floor. The contents spilled out in a chaotic heap. Papers, a worn-out leather notebook, a single pen, and a framed photograph of a woman. For a moment, there was silence. Then Lauren laughed. Oh, wow, she sneered, nudging the notebook with the tip of her shoe. This is pathetic. What is this, a resume? Are you looking for a job up here? The old man bent down hurriedly, hands trembling as he tried to collect his things. Lauren stepped on the photograph, grinding her heel into the glass. Oops. A small crack splintered through the frame. The old man froze, his fingers hovering just above the shards. A few gasps sounded from nearby passengers, but no one moved to help. Lauren smirked. Sorry about that. But honestly, judging by this junk, I think I did you a favor. The old man's breath was shallow. He didn't look up, didn't speak, didn't argue. He just picked up the broken pieces, one by one, with painstaking care. She exhaled, feigning boredom. Well, now that we've established that you're not some big shot, let's go ahead and get you resettled. Security will be here any second, and I'd hate for them to have to escort you out. Lauren tapped her foot impatiently as the old man bent down, carefully gathering his scattered belongings. Her eyes darted to the dull glint of metal among the mess, a small, round medal that had slid out from his notebook. She smirked and bent down before he could reach it, snatching it up between two fingers. Well, she mused, holding it up to the cabin lights. What do we have here? She turned it over in her palm, her eyes widening with exaggerated surprise. Wait, is this a military medal? The old man stiffened. His fingers hovered just inches away, frozen in midair. Lauren let out a dramatic gasp. Oh my God, are you telling me? She turned to the nearest passengers, making sure everyone could hear, that we have an American hero in our presence. A few people chuckled. Someone clapped, mockingly slow. Lauren bit her lip to keep from laughing. So let me get this straight, she said, twirling the medal between her fingers. You spent years serving this country, risking your life, sacrificing so much, and now you what? She tilted her head, her eyes gleaming with cruelty. Flying first class with a handout. The old man said nothing. He only stared at the medal, his breath shallow. Lauren stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough for only him to hear. Tell me, old man, she whispered, did you win this for bravery? For saving lives? She paused, then let out a soft chuckle. Or did they just pity you? A murmur spread through the nearby passengers. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged amused glances. No one spoke up. No one told her to stop. Lauren straightened up, turning back to the audience she had created. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but I think it's pretty tragic. Fighting for a country that lets you rot away afterward. I mean, look at him. He can barely afford a decent briefcase. Lauren sighed dramatically and dangled the medal over the old man's outstretched hand. I bet this was the best thing you ever got in life, wasn't it? She smiled sweetly. Here, I wouldn't want to steal your only achievement. Just as the old man reached for it, Lauren let go. The medal clattered onto the floor, rolling under the seats. The old man flinched. For a second, his knees bent slightly, as if his body instinctively wanted to kneel, to crawl under the seats and retrieve it. But then he just stood there, his fingers curling into his palms. Lauren leaned in, voice low, taunting. "Come on, soldier. Don't you have orders to retrieve fallen assets?" The humiliation pressed down on him like a weight. His body screamed to move, to grab the medal, but his mind told him not to. Not in front of all these people. Lauren chuckled and turned away, flipping her hair over her shoulder. Guess he's not much of a fighter anymore. Lily watched in silence, her face pale. But still, she said nothing. The old man slowly lowered himself into a seat, his arms wrapped around himself, his head tilted downward. Lauren lingered near his seat, watching as the old man sat stiffly, his hands gripping the armrests like they were the only thing keeping him upright. His eyes stayed locked on the floor where the medal lay, half hidden beneath the seat. She smirked, taking her time before speaking. "What's the matter, soldier? Not gonna pick it up?" Her voice dripped with mock sympathy. "I mean, you fought for it, didn't you?" The old man's fingers twitched, but he didn't move. Lauren let out an exaggerated sigh and bent down as if she was about to retrieve it. Instead, she kicked it further down the aisle, sending it skidding beneath another row of seats. "Oops," she said, giggling. "Butterfingers." A few chuckles spread through the cabin. The old man clenched his jaw. His breathing was shallow, barely controlled. Lauren tapped her chin, feigning curiosity. "Tell me something. When you were in the army, did you ever have to crawl in the dirt? Because, well," she gestured to the floor where the medal had disappeared. "Looks like you might have to relive the experience." The old man didn't respond, didn't flinch. Lauren sighed dramatically and turned to a businessman seated nearby. "You know, I always thought soldiers were trained to obey orders." She snapped her fingers toward the medal's direction. "Retrieve your asset, veteran." The businessman chuckled. A woman across the aisle shook her head, smirking. The old man's knuckles turned white. His entire body was rigid, as if physically forcing itself to remain still. Lauren leaned in, lowering her voice just for him. "Or is that just what you were good at? Taking orders?" Bowing down, her lips curled. "You're used to being beneath people, aren't you?" The old man exhaled sharply. Lauren straightened, stretching her arms lazily. "Well, I guess that discipline didn't last long, huh?" She turned to the nearest flight attendant. "Lily, be a dear and grab a napkin, will you? Our honored guest might need something to wipe the dirt off his knees once he's done retrieving his precious medal." Lily hesitated. For a brief second, something flickered across her face, discomfort, maybe even shame. But she said nothing. Lauren grinned, satisfied. "Oh well," she mused, stepping back toward the aisle. "Maybe some things really don't change. He spent his life following orders, and now he's just another old man who doesn't matter anymore." The silence in the cabin was thick. No one objected. No one told her to stop. The old man sat motionless, his shoulders heavy, his eyes empty. Lauren watched with satisfaction as the old man remained motionless, his shoulders hunched forward as if trying to make himself smaller. His hands rested in his lap, fingers curled inward, not clenched in anger, just tired, as if his body had long grown used to being treated this way. But she wasn't done. She turned her head slightly, just in time to see him slowly reach for his seatbelt. He moved carefully, deliberately, as if gathering the last bits of dignity he had left. Then, with quiet precision, he unbuckled and pushed himself up from a seat. Lauren blocked his path immediately. "Whoa, whoa, whoa." She stepped in front of him, planting herself firmly between him and the aisle. "Where do you think you're going?" The old man didn't look at her. His voice was quiet, nearly drowned out by the hum of the plane. "Restroom." Lauren tilted her head, pretending to be amused. "Restroom?" She looked around theatrically, as if checking for something. Then she gasped. "Oh no," she said, voice dripping with mock concern. "I'm afraid first-class restrooms are reserved for our premium passengers." She saw it then, the tiniest shift in his posture, the smallest flicker in his eyes. A crack. The realization that he couldn't even do something as simple as use the restroom without permission. Lauren leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just for him. "Come on, you must be used to rough conditions, right? No private stalls in the trenches, huh?" A few passengers nearby smirked. Someone snorted under their breath. The old man stood rigid, his body visibly tensing. Lauren gave him a slow, deliberate once-over, letting her gaze travel from his scuffed shoes up to his faded suit. Then she shook her head. "No offense, but we do have standards up here. And well," she wrinkled her nose, "we can't have the bathroom smelling like sweat and regret, can we?" The old man's lips pressed into a thin line. Lauren sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "Fine, fine. I'll tell you what. Since I'm feeling extra generous today, I'll allow you to use the restroom." Then she pointed toward the back of the plane, the economy section. There was a long, heavy pause. Passengers around them shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to hear, others watching with open amusement. The old man stood still, his breath steady but shallow. Lauren tapped her wrist, feigning impatience. "Well, you wanted to go, didn't you? What's wrong?" She smirked. "Too proud to walk through your people section?" The jab hit exactly where she wanted it to. She saw the way his fingers twitched, the barely perceptible way his throat bobbed as he swallowed down whatever words he wanted to say but couldn't. Finally, he moved. Without a word, without meeting anyone's gaze, he turned and began the long walk toward the back. Lauren grinned. As he passed through the aisle, economy passengers looked up in confusion. Some whispered. Others openly stared. He kept his head down, his pace steady but slow, as if every step took something from him. Lauren called after him, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't take too long, sir. We wouldn't want you lingering where you don't belong." The door to the economy restroom clicked shut behind him. Lauren exhaled in satisfaction, turning back toward first class. Then, with a casual hum, she walked over to a young businessman sitting by the aisle. She leaned down slightly, giving him a conspiratorial smile. "Say," she whispered, "I don't suppose you'd be willing to switch seats, would you?" The man raised an eyebrow. "Switch? Why?" Lauren gestured toward the old man's empty seat. "I just figured you'd enjoy having a bit more space. And I don't think our guest will mind moving somewhere more appropriate." The businessman chuckled, shaking his head. "I mean, if it's okay with the crew, sure." Lauren beamed. "Oh, it's more than okay. I'll handle everything." She waved over Lily, who hesitated before approaching. "Lily, dear, help our kind passenger here move his things over to 2A. And while you're at it, see if you can find a more fitting seat for our soldier." Lily's lips parted slightly. "Lauren, I don't think." Lauren shot her a look. Lily's mouth snapped shut. Within minutes, the seat swap was complete. Lauren made sure to personally rearrange the tray tables, removing the complimentary champagne and luxury meal from the old man's former seat and replacing it with a plain water bottle and a single packet of peanuts. Then, just as the old man returned, she gestured toward his new seat, right next to the garbage disposal area. He stopped mid-step, his body going unnaturally still. Lauren smiled sweetly. "Sorry for the inconvenience. But, we have to make sure the seating reflects our passengers' status." The old man looked at her then. She tapped the camera icon, angling the lens just enough to capture the image without being obvious. The old man sat rigidly in his new seat, shoulders hunched, eyes cast downward. The small table in front of him held nothing but a bottle of water and an untouched pack of peanuts, a stark contrast to the luxurious meals being served around him. She smirked, snapped the photo, and quickly typed out a message to the flight crew's private group chat. "Look at our special guest. First class wasn't enough, so now he's experiencing VIP service next to the trash. Guess even heroes need to know their place." A few seconds later, replies started rolling in. "OMG Lauren, you're terrible. Wait, is that the guy from earlier? Ha ha ha, I swear. Some people just don't know when they don't belong." Lauren chuckled under her breath, satisfaction curling in her chest. She pocketed her phone and turned back toward the cabin, her eyes landing on a middle-aged man seated a few rows ahead. He had been watching the whole thing unfold, amusement flickering in his gaze. Their eyes met, and he raised a brow, lips curling in a knowing smirk. Lauren took that as an invitation. She sauntered over, leaning against the man's seat, lowering her voice just enough for those nearby to hear. Crazy, isn't it? She mused. Some people just don't understand how airlines work. The man chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah, it's embarrassing. If you can't afford first class, don't try to fake it. Lauren grinned. Exactly. And did you see him earlier? Pathetic. Sitting there like he actually belonged. She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. I mean, I respect veterans and all, but come on. He really thought a dusty old metal could buy him a seat up here. The man laughed. I bet he pulled the "I served my country" card, didn't he? Lauren smirked. Oh, multiple times. But hey, at least he's learning his lesson now. A few other passengers joined in, murmuring in agreement, emboldened by her tone. One woman, dressed in designer clothes, scoffed under her breath. Honestly, I don't even think these airlines should be giving handouts like that. It ruins the experience for the rest of us. Lauren nodded approvingly. Exactly what I was thinking. Across the aisle, an older businessman cleared his throat loudly, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Lauren ignored him, satisfied with how the conversation was steering. She turned on her heel and made her way back toward the old man. His hands rested motionless on his lap, his shoulders still set in that same tense, withdrawn posture. He had heard everything. Lauren smiled down at him. How's the new seat, sir? She asked, her voice overly sweet. Getting the full 5-star experience? The old man said nothing. Lauren leaned closer, just enough that only he could hear. You know, she murmured, if this is too much for you, I'm sure we could find a spot in the cargo hold. Might be more familiar. A flicker of something passed through his eyes, but it was gone in an instant. He didn't react, didn't argue. Lauren straightened up, feigning disappointment. No response? That's a shame. I was hoping to hear another war story. She turned away, just as a young man, a few rows ahead, let out a mocking laugh. Hey, he called out, voice dripping with condescension. Should we salute him or something? Another passenger, a woman clutching a champagne glass, snorted. Please. His glory days are long gone. Lauren hid her grin behind her hand. The old man remained still, as if physically forcing himself not to react. Lauren took a step back, admiring her work. He was completely cornered, completely alone. No one to defend him, no way to escape. Just as she was about to walk away, she felt the turbulence before she saw it. The plane gave a sudden, sharp jolt, and for the briefest second, the cabin tilted. A few gasps rippled through the passengers, some clutching their armrests. Lauren stumbled slightly, but quickly regained her footing. Lauren narrowed her eyes, irritation flickering in her chest. Even now, even when she had stripped away everything, there was something about him that refused to shatter completely. She didn't like that. Enjoy this flight while it lasts, she murmured. Because once we land, you won't be stepping foot in first class again. Ever. The old man didn't answer. Lauren straightened, adjusted her uniform, and walked away, victorious. The old man was finally silent. No movement, no resistance, just a shell of whatever dignity he had left, sitting motionless next to the trash bin. She had won, or so she thought. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She barely glanced at it, expecting another joke from the crew chat, but as soon as she saw the sender, her stomach tightened. TSA Executive Operations Urgent. Lauren frowned and tapped the screen. The message was short, cold, and absolute. Lauren Whitmore, immediately cease all actions against passenger in seat 2A. Await further instruction upon landing. Her blood ran cold. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She read the message again, then a third time, but the words didn't change. Seat 2A. The old man. No, this had to be a mistake. He was nobody. A washed-up veteran who somehow managed to get a first-class seat. There was no way someone from TSA, let alone executive operations, would care about him. Lauren's mind raced. Had someone on board complained? Had that idiot Lily reported her? No, she would have seen it coming. But something was wrong. Very wrong. She turned, eyes scanning the cabin, but nothing had changed. The passengers were still enjoying their drinks, still laughing, still comfortable in their first-class bubbles. The old man still hadn't moved. Then, a second message came through. Landing procedures have been adjusted. Security team awaiting arrival. Do not engage further. Lauren's throat went dry. Security team? Adjusted procedures? What the hell was happening? She turned toward the front of the plane, where the flight deck was. She caught a glimpse of the pilot exchanging hushed words with the co-pilot, their expressions tense. The captain glanced toward her, holding eye contact for a fraction of a second before looking away. He knew. Lauren's heart pounded against her ribs. She spun back toward the old man, the weight of her own actions crashing down on her all at once. He sat completely still, his hands folded neatly in his lap. His expression remained unreadable, but something about the way he breathed sent a chill down her spine. For the first time since this flight began, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Fear. She stepped forward, lowering her voice. "Who the hell are you?" The old man finally looked up, and he smiled. Lauren's breath hitched. It wasn't an arrogant smile. It wasn't even cruel. It was calm. It was the smile of a man who had already won. The aircraft descended sharply, the pilot's voice crackling over the intercom, announcing the approach to the airport. Passengers barely noticed Lauren standing frozen in the aisle, her mind spiraling out of control. When the wheels hit the tarmac, she jolted slightly, fingers digging into her palms. She barely remembered moving toward the galley, barely heard the final announcements as the plane taxied to the gate. Then, as soon as the seatbelt lights switched off, the real nightmare began. Lauren barely took a step before she heard it. The sharp stomp of boots against the jet bridge. The low murmur of voices, too firm, too authoritative. Then they boarded. 3 men in black suits. Passengers fell silent. Even those who had laughed along with her before now shifted nervously, instinctively sensing the shift in power. Lauren's stomach twisted as the lead agent's cold gaze locked onto her. "Lauren Whitmore," he stated. Not asked, stated. Her voice died in her throat. "You will come with us." Lauren's pulse skyrocketed. Her breath came short, fast. What's this about?" The agent ignored her. He turned toward the old man, still seated, still calm, still smiling. And then he saluted. The entire cabin sucked in a breath. Lauren felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Welcome back, sir," the agent said, his voice laced with something dangerously close to reverence. Passengers gaped. Someone gasped. A few muttered in confusion, eyes darting between the old man and the suited man. Lauren couldn't move. The old man finally stood. He took his time adjusting his sleeves, straightening his posture, before turning directly toward Lauren. For the first time, his voice filled the cabin. "Are you still laughing?" Lauren's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Because suddenly, it didn't matter that she was the flight supervisor. It didn't matter that she had first class backing her, that she had spent the last few hours tearing this man down. Lauren's breath came in shallow gasps, her fingers twitching at her sides. The weight of the entire plane's attention pressed down on her, the silent judgment, the disbelief, the quiet realization dawning across the faces of the passengers who had laughed with her just moments before. No one was laughing now. The old man held her gaze for a few agonizing seconds before stepping past her, moving with the slow, measured confidence of someone who had never once needed to raise his voice to command a room. He approached the lead agent, who nodded respectfully before stepping aside, clearing a path through the first-class cabin, as if escorting a king rather than a man who had just spent hours being humiliated. Lauren wanted to scream, wanted to deny it, wanted to insist that there had been some mistake. But she couldn't move, couldn't force the words past her tightening throat. The pilot stepped out of the cockpit, his normally composed face tense. He locked eyes with the old man, then saluted, a real salute, crisp and practiced. "Sir, we've prepared the executive exit for you. The board is waiting." Lauren's stomach dropped. Passengers began whispering, murmurs of confusion rippling through the cabin. The businessman who had mocked the old man earlier paled visibly, his gaze darting between the suited agents and the pilot as realization dawned. A woman near the front shifted uncomfortably, gripping her designer handbag as if hoping to sink into her seat and disappear. Lauren swallowed hard, forcing herself to take a step forward. "Wait," she croaked, her voice barely above a whisper. Who is he?" The lead agent turned his cold, unwavering stare on her. "You don't even know the name of the man you spent the last 6 hours degrading." His voice was calm, almost amused. "That's unfortunate." Lauren shook her head rapidly, sweat prickling at her temples. "No, this doesn't make sense. He's just some old veteran." The old man stopped walking. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather folder, its edges scuffed from years of handling. He turned it over in his hands once, then casually handed it to the lead agent. The agent took it, unfolded it, and revealed a set of official documents, signed and sealed with the insignia of the airline's highest authority. The pilot exhaled sharply. "Oh my God!" Lauren's pulse thundered in her ears. The agent's lips quirked into something resembling a smirk as he read aloud. "Retired General Samuel Grant, former Vice Chairman of the Federal Aviation Council, founder and honorary chairman of this airline." Lauren staggered back, barely catching herself against a seat. Passengers gasped. A stunned silence fell over the cabin, heavier than anything before. Samuel Grant, the Samuel Grant, had been sitting in front of them the entire time. The very man who had built this airline from the ground up, whose name was printed on plaques in executive offices, whose influence extended far beyond anything Lauren could ever comprehend. And she had treated him like garbage. Her body felt like lead, every limb too heavy to move. She opened her mouth, tried to force out some desperate excuse, some plea, but the words refused to come. Samuel turned to her again, his expression unreadable. "Lauren Whitmore," he said, his voice as steady and calm as it had been all along. "You're fired." The words hit her like a physical blow. Passengers stared, some in shock, others with grim satisfaction. Lily, who had spent the flight watching helplessly, let out a quiet exhale, something close to relief flashing in her eyes. Lauren shook her head violently, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Wait, please," she turned to the pilot, to the lead agent, to anyone who would listen. "I didn't know. I was just following policy." The agent arched a brow. "Following policy?" His gaze flicked to Samuel. "Sir, does company policy include harassment, humiliation, and physical aggression toward one of its founders?" Samuel said nothing. He didn't need to. Lauren's face drained of color. The agent stepped aside, and from the jet bridge, another airline official entered, a crisp navy blue uniform perfectly pressed. He held a sealed envelope in one hand and a neatly folded uniform in the other. He didn't look at Lauren as he spoke. "Ms. Whitmore, per immediate orders from the board, you have been permanently dismissed from your position. Your employee credentials have been revoked." He extended the envelope toward her. "This is your official termination notice. You are to surrender your uniform and exit through the staff corridor, where airport security will escort you off the premises." Lauren stared at the envelope, her hands shaking so hard she could barely reach for it. "Please," she whispered. "This is my career, my life. You can't just..." The officer cut her off. "We have also taken the liberty of arranging a suitable replacement position for you." He lifted the folded uniform, and for the first time, Lauren saw the insignia embroidered on the chest. Airport Janitorial Services. Her knees buckled. A hush fell over the passengers. No one spoke. No one moved. Lauren's hands trembled as she reached out, hesitating, fingers brushing against the rough fabric of the uniform. Then Samuel spoke one last time. "You spent this entire flight treating me like nothing." His voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "Now you get to learn what it's like to be treated as if you don't matter." Lauren sucked in a sharp breath, her vision swimming. The lead agent gestured toward the exit. "Time to go." Lauren's lips parted, her throat tightening around a plea that would never leave her mouth. She had spent the last 6 hours tearing another person down, reveling in their suffering. And now, she was the one being dragged into the dirt. Passengers turned away as she stumbled forward, forced to take the walk of shame down the jet bridge, stripped of everything she had once been. The world around her blurred as security marched her forward, their footsteps echoing in the hollow, empty hall. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps, her mind still struggling to process the nightmare unraveling before her. This couldn't be happening. But it was. The exit doors loomed ahead, glowing under harsh fluorescent lights. Beyond them, the airport bustled with life. Passengers hurrying to their gates, staff going about their duties, a world that no longer had a place for her. The guards reached the last checkpoint. One of them unclipped her badge from her uniform, scanning it one last time before deactivating it permanently. The small beep felt deafening. Lauren's lips parted, her voice cracking. "Please, I can fix this." The guard didn't even look at her. He simply stepped aside, motioning to the automatic doors. "Exits that way." The doors slid open, revealing the cold, impersonal stretch of the airport's service entrance, the way out for terminated employees. Lauren hesitated, her feet frozen to the floor. Then, from behind, a familiar voice cut through the air like a blade. "She's still here." Lauren turned sharply, her pulse spiking. A flight attendant from another crew stood nearby, her arms crossed, watching the scene with barely concealed amusement. Another attendant smirked, shaking his head. "Damn, she was one of the worst ones, huh?" Lauren's face burned. The first attendant clicked her tongue. "You know what's funny? She spent years thinking she was better than everyone, treated half the staff like trash. And now," she gestured toward the janitorial uniform still clutched in Lauren's trembling hands, "she's not even worth a job on the plane." Lauren's stomach twisted painfully. A few employees nearby glanced in her direction, whispering among themselves. Their stares felt heavier than any humiliation she had ever inflicted on someone else. A sharp breeze hit her as she took a shaky step forward. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the doors slid shut behind her. The airport had spit her out like she was nothing. Lauren sucked in a breath, blinking rapidly. She looked down at the uniform in her grip, a cruel joke, a mockery of everything she once believed she was. She clenched her fists around the fabric, her nails digging into her palms. Then a slow, deliberate set of footsteps approached. Lauren knew who it was before she even turned. Samuel Grant stood just a few feet away, his gaze as steady and unreadable as ever. He adjusted his sleeve, then took a single step closer. "You seem lost," he said calmly. Lauren's throat tightened. Samuel glanced at the uniform in her hands. "I believe that belongs to you now." Lauren shook her head, her breath shaky. "Please," she whispered. I didn't know who you were." "If I had known," Samuel's expression didn't change. "If you had known, you would have acted differently." His voice was low even, but there was a weight behind every word. "That's the problem." Lauren's heart pounded violently against her ribs. He studied her for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke the last words she would ever hear from him. "You spent this entire flight looking down on me, and now no one will ever look up to you again." Lauren's knees nearly buckled. Samuel nodded to the security team. Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the terminal without a single glance back. The end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one. What do you think was the most shocking moment in this story? Did Lauren get what she deserved? Comment below and let us know your thoughts. Also, tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers all around the world.